Serenity Lake Standoff, a tale of justice and retribution. The moment I handed the trespassing notice to the HOA president during her Grand Lake parade was the first time I'd ever seen Margaret Hensley utterly speechless. Her face, usually a mask of smug authority, froze as she realized her attempt to fine me $5,000 for using my own lake had backfired spectacularly. I bought the lake, and now she and her HOA cronies owed me $1.8 million for trespassing. Oh, it escalated, and it was glorious. My name's Tom Whitaker, and I'm no stranger to a fight, especially when it's about principle. At 62, I've spent decades in real estate, sniffing out undervalued properties and turning them into gold. Not flashy skyscrapers, mind you, just forgotten strip malls, overlooked land parcels, the kind of deals that teach you patience and the power of a dusty deed. My wife, Ellen, and I moved to Serenity Springs, a quiet lakeside community in suburban Ohio, to enjoy our semi-retirement. The man-made lake was the heart of the neighborhood, fringed by neat homes with manicured lawns. Our modest lakefront property came with just enough shoreline to dock our little electric pontoon boat, the Drifter. It was perfect for lazy evenings watching the sunset or teaching our grandkids to fish. For 2 years, life was idyllic. The HOA, led by Margaret Hensley, seemed harmless enough, fussing over mailbox colors and lawn heights. But Margaret was biding her time, sharpening her claws like a cat waiting to pounce. The trouble started on a perfect July Saturday, the kind where the sky is a cloudless blue and the lake sparkles like a jewel. Ellen was visiting her sister, so I took the Drifter out for a solo cruise, drifting near the lake's center, lost in thought. An hour in, a gaudy pontoon roared up, all chrome and fake leather, dwarfing my humble boat. At the helm stood Margaret, decked out in a loud floral dress and sunglasses that screamed money. Her frown was sharper than a razor. Flanking her were 2 women I vaguely recognized from HOA meetings, both radiating self-importance. "Mr. Whitaker, isn't it?" Margaret's voice sliced through the calm, dripping with condescension. I nodded, keeping my tone light. "Beautiful day, Margaret." She ignored me. "Are you aware that lake use for pontooning is restricted to members of the Serenity Springs Lake Club?" I blinked. "Lake Club? What is she talking about?" I paid my HOA dues, kept my property spotless. "First I'm hearing of it," I said, genuinely confused. "The bylaws say the lake's open to all residents." Margaret sighed like I was a slow child. "The Lake Club is for dedicated residents who fund lake preservation. Membership grants priority access." She waved dismissively at my boat. "Like this." I stayed calm, but my blood simmered. "Margaret, I read the covenants when we moved in. There's no mention of a club or restricted access." Her lips thinned. "Things change, Mr. Whitaker. Updates are made. I suggest you head to shore to avoid any misunderstandings." With that, she gunned her engine, sending a wake that rocked the Drifter, and sped off. I was irritated but not panicked. The idea of a lake club sounded like nonsense, and I knew the HOA covenants backward. I stayed out another half hour, savoring the peace Margaret had tried to shatter, then headed home to check the latest HOA newsletter. Surely, I hadn't missed anything this absurd. The bombshell landed the following Tuesday. A certified letter arrived from the Serenity Springs HOA Enforcement Division, a grandiose title for their sleepy office. Inside was a violation notice, cold and formal, claiming I'd broken Section 7, Subsection B, Paragraph 3 of the lake usage regulations by operating an unpermitted watercraft in a club activity zone. The fine? $5,000, due in 30 days. My jaw hit the floor. $5,000 for taking my boat out? And what the hell was a club activity zone? I dug out the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CCRs, legal documents I'd studied before buying. No such section existed. The notice referenced an addendum with updated regulations, but the flimsy paper attached looked like it was printed at Kinko's, not an official amendment. It outlined the Lake Club's rules, signed by Margaret Hensley and countersigned by Walter Gibbs, the HOA treasurer, a nervous guy more known for his rose garden than his backbone. No adoption date, no community vote, nothing to suggest this was legit. It was a sham. Ellen was livid when I showed her. $5,000 for using our boat? Margaret can't just make up rules and fine people. I agreed, my outrage morphing into resolve. This wasn't just a fine, it was a power grab. If Margaret thought I'd roll over, she'd misjudged me. That night, I pored over the CCRs, cross-referencing them with Ohio HOA laws. A plan was forming, not just to fight the fine, but to turn Margaret's game against her. I started with the polite route, drafting a letter to the HOA board, appealing the fine and demanding clarification on the lake club's legitimacy. I sent it via registered mail, ensuring a paper trail. 2 weeks passed, silence. My emails went unanswered. My calls met with a frazzled receptionist, Lisa, who stammered, "Mrs. Hensley handles all lake matters. She's in a meeting." Margaret was always in a meeting. Finally, I cornered a board member, Fred Larson, a retired CPA, while he walked his labradoodle. Fred was decent, but spineless. When I asked about the fine, he fidgeted. "Margaret's passionate about the lake, Tom. Says it needs protecting. The club raises funds for beautification." I pressed him. "But are these rules legal? Was there a vote?" Fred sighed, avoiding my eyes. "Between you and me, Margaret runs the show." She called it an urgent update. Most of us just went along. It's easier than fighting her. His words lit a fire in me. Margaret wasn't just overreaching. She was running a dictatorship. The lake club sounded like a front, possibly funneling money somewhere shady. My real estate instincts kicked in. If the HOA was playing fast and loose, maybe their claim to the lake wasn't airtight. Man-made, lakes often have murky ownership histories. What if Margaret's control was an illusion? I headed to the county recorder's office, armed with plat maps and legal descriptions. Sifting through deeds and archives, I found a gap. The original developer, Blue Water Homes, created the lake in the 1970s but never explicitly deeded it to the HOA. Blue Water went bankrupt in the 1980s, and their assets were shuffled into a holding trust, Serenity Springs Holdings. The trust paid minimal taxes on a parcel matching the lake's description, then went dormant. No one, not even the HOA, seemed to know it existed. My heart raced. Could the lake, the centerpiece of Margaret's empire, belong to a forgotten trust? I hired a probate research firm to track the trust's heirs. Meanwhile, I spoke to old-timers like Mrs. Gladys Porter, who'd lived here since the 70s. The lake was for everyone back then, she said. No clubs, no fines. Margaret's changed things. Her words confirmed my suspicions. The lake club was Margaret's invention, likely a scheme to consolidate power and maybe pocket dues. The research firm found the trust descendants, living in Indiana, unaware they own a lake. To them, it was a minor tax nuisance. When we hinted at buying it, they were intrigued, eager to offload a headache. I grinned, looking out at the lake, Margaret's kingdom. She had no idea what was coming. The realization that Serenity Springs Lake might not belong to the HOA was like finding a hidden ace in a high-stakes poker game. Margaret Hensley thought she held all the cards, but I was about to change the rules. My name's Tom Whitaker, and at 62, I've learned that the best way to win a fight is to outsmart your opponent. Margaret's $5,000 fine for my pontoon boat was an insult, but discovering the lake's murky ownership was an opportunity, one I was uniquely equipped to seize. After confirming the Serenity Springs Holdings Trust still owned the lake, I knew I had to move carefully. Margaret wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was cunning, and any misstep could tip her off. I needed to buy the lake without her catching wind, then use it to dismantle her reign. It was audacious, maybe even a little crazy, but the thought of her face when she learned the truth, that was worth every penny. I called Laura Bennett, a no-nonsense attorney I'd worked with on complex real estate deals. Over coffee at a diner outside town, I laid out the saga: Margaret's pontoon ambush, the bogus fine, the sham lake club, and my discovery about the trust. Laura's eyes sparkled as I described my plan to buy the lake. "Tom," she said, leaning back, "this is bold, borderline insane. You're talking about buying an entire lake to settle a score with an HOA president. Are you sure? I grinned. It's not just a score, Laura. It's about principle. Plus, owning the lake could be a smart investment if we manage it right. And yeah, seeing Margaret squirm is a bonus. Laura chuckled. All right, principle it is, with a side of revenge. I'm in. We'll form an LLC to keep your name out of it until the big reveal. Something bland, untraceable. We settled on Clearwater Holdings LLC, generic enough to fly under the radar. Laura would handle negotiations with the trust descendants, framing the deal as a routine land purchase by an investment group. We didn't want them realizing the lake was the crown jewel of a wealthy community and hiking the price. While Laura worked, I dug deeper into the HOA's operations. The lake club was the key. If Margaret was collecting dues, where was the money going? The annual HOA financials were vague, lumping lake maintenance into a single line item with no breakdown. I suspected the club had its own accounts, possibly off the books. If so, that was fraud or at least gross negligence. I needed evidence, but first, I had to secure the lake. The trust descendants, a family in Indiana, were surprisingly cooperative. They knew they owned fragments of old land, but had no clue one was a lake in a posh Ohio suburb. To them, it was a tax bill their lawyer paid without question. Laura's team commissioned a survey and title search, confirming Clearwater Holdings LLC would own the lake bed and riparian rights, with the HOA holding only access easements for residents. The HOA had assumed control for decades, unchallenged, because no one bothered to check the deeds. Negotiations took weeks. The descendants were cautious but eager to unload a forgotten asset. We agreed on a price, steep, but within my means, and a steal for a lake in a high-value community. Ellen was stunned when I told her. "You're really buying the whole lake?" she asked, eyes wide. "The whole thing, sweetheart," I replied, grinning. "Margaret's going to lose her mind." Ellen shook her head, half amused, half awestruck. "You're something else, Tom." While Laura finalized the paperwork, I played a double game. To keep Margaret off guard, I paid the $5,000 fine under protest, sending a check with a letter stating I disputed its legitimacy, but was complying to avoid liens. This had two effects. It made Margaret think she'd won, and it set up my claim for damages if I sued the HOA later. Word got back through Fred Larson's wife, a friend of Ellen's, that Margaret was gloating at a board meeting. Mr. Whitaker came to his senses. She reportedly crowed. "People need to know who's in charge." "Oh, Margaret, you had no idea." I also became a stealth investigator. Every time the Lake Club held an event, pontoon parties, kayak races, members-only swims, I was there discreetly snapping photos and recording videos. I logged dates, times, and participants, especially board members like Walter Gibbs, who loved parading on his overpriced boat. My neighbors probably thought I'd gone nuts, lugging a camera with a long lens or strolling the shoreline with a camcorder. Let them wonder. Each image was another bullet in my arsenal. The closing happened on a rainy Tuesday in September. No ceremony, just me, Laura, and a stack of documents signed for Clearwater Holdings LLC. When Laura handed me the recorded deed, I felt a surge of triumph mixed with disbelief. I, Tom Whitaker, owned Serenity Springs Lake. For a few days, I kept it quiet, savoring the secret. I'd walk to my dock, gaze at my water, and smile. Margaret and her cronies were still strutting around, oblivious that their playground was now my property. The Lake Club's Fall Festival Pontoon Parade was set for the first Saturday in October. Perfect timing. I had Laura draft trespass notices, demand letters, and invoices. We calculated a daily access fee for unauthorized lake use, based on private lake club rates and boat rentals, then multiplied it by the number of boats, people, and days since Clearwater Holdings took title. The total for the HOA, $1.8 million. We also prepared personal notices for Margaret and key board members, holding them liable for organizing the trespass. Margaret's personal bill was $250,000, citing her role in creating the fake club. The stage was set. Laura would deliver the notices during the parade with a process server for maximum impact. I readied my camera, not just for evidence, but to capture the moment Margaret's world crumbled. October dawned crisp and clear, ideal for the parade. From my deck, I watched boats gather at the community ramp, decked out with fake pumpkins and autumn leaves. Margaret's flagship, the Majesty, was the gaudiest, sporting a Serenity Springs Lake Club, members-only banner. She stood at the helm in a garish orange sweater, directing her flotilla like a queen. At 2 p.m., as the parade hit its peak, Laura and the process server, a grim man named Ronald Hayes, arrived at the HOA clubhouse, where Margaret held court when not on the water. Lisa, the receptionist, stammered that Margaret was busy with the parade. Laura smiled. "Our business concerns the parade and the lake." Lisa radioed Margaret, and through my binoculars, I saw her snatch the radio, scowl, and bark a reply. A small boat sped to shore, returning with a furious Margaret, who stormed into the clubhouse. Laura later described the scene with relish. Margaret burst in, demanding, "What's so important interrupts my parade?" Laura introduced herself as counsel for Clearwater Holdings, LLC, the lake's owners. Margaret scoffed. "Owners? The HOA owns the lake. This is nonsense." Laura handed her 2 envelopes, one for the HOA, one personal. Ronald served them formally. Margaret tore into the HOAs, her face paling as she read the demand letter, deed, and $1.8 million invoice. The personal envelope was worse, $250,000 for her role in the trespass. She gripped the counter, swaying. This is a mistake," she stammered. Laura's reply was icy. "No mistake, Mrs. Hensley. Clearwater Holdings has clear title. Your attorney can verify." From my deck, I watched the parade falter. Boats drifted, confused as whisper spread. Margaret's empire was cracking, and I was just getting started. The moment Margaret Hensley clutched those trespassing notices, her carefully constructed world began to unravel. I'm Tom Whitaker, the guy who turned her $5,000 fine against me into a $1.8 million reckoning for her HOA. Owning Serenity Springs Lake wasn't just about winning. It was about exposing a tyrant and restoring fairness to our community. From my deck, camera in hand, I watched the Fall Festival pontoon parade dissolve into chaos, a fitting metaphor for Margaret's collapsing reign. Back at the HOA clubhouse, Laura Bennett, my attorney, stood calm as Margaret's shock turned to fury. According to Laura, Margaret's voice trembled as she sputtered, "This is outrageous. We've always controlled the lake." Laura didn't flinch. "The deeds say otherwise, Mrs. Hensley. Clearwater Holdings, LLC owns the lake bed, and your activities constitute trespass." She suggested Margaret's attorney review the enclosed title report, then added, "We're also curious about the Serenity Springs Lake Club's finances. We'll expect transparency there, too." That last jab was deliberate, hinting at a deeper investigation into Margaret's pet project. Margaret's face went from pale to ghostly. The personal invoice for $250,000, nailing her for orchestrating the unauthorized lake events, hit like a sledgehammer. Witnesses in the clubhouse lobby said she looked like she might faint, her manicured nails digging into the counter. Meanwhile, couriers were delivering similar notices to other board members' homes, each tailored to their level of involvement in the lake club's activities. Walter Gibbs, the treasurer, got a $100,000 bill. Others ranged from $50,000 to $80,000. Loyalty to Margaret was suddenly a very expensive mistake. By late afternoon, the parade was a shambles. Boats limped back to the community ramp, the festive mood replaced by confusion and dread. I caught snippets of chatter through my binoculars, residents whispering, "Who's Clearwater Holdings? And does the HOA not own the lake?" Margaret returned to her pontoon, the Majesty, but her imperious swagger was gone. She looked shaken, barking orders to disperse the flotilla. I snapped a photo. Her defeated slump was one for the scrapbook. The fallout was immediate and messy. That evening, Margaret was reportedly glued to her phone, screaming at the HOA's attorney, Leonard Price, a timid man who seemed out of his depth. Board members, blindsided by their personal invoices, flooded Leonard with panicked calls. An emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Sunday night, and thanks to Mrs. Gladys Porter's gossip network, I knew it would be a circus. Residents were buzzing, some outraged at this mysterious Clearwater Holdings, others suspicious of Margaret's Lake Club. The community's trust in the HOA was fracturing. Sunday's meeting was standing room only. Margaret, trying to regain control, framed Clearwater Holdings as a predatory corporation exploiting the community. "They can't take our lake," she thundered, pounding the podium. "We have historic rights." But her bluster faltered when Walter Gibbs, looking like he'd aged a decade, asked, "Do we actually own the lake, Margaret?" These documents include a deed. Leonard Price, who'd done a frantic title search, delivered the bad news. Clearwater Holdings held clear title. The HOA's claim was based on decades of assumption, not legal ownership. Their directors and officers' insurance carrier was already balking, citing potential misrepresentation by the board. The room went silent. Board members who'd rubber-stamped Margaret's rules realized they faced personal financial ruin. Fred Larson, the CPA, spoke up, his voice shaky but firm. "Margaret, did you verify the lake's ownership before creating the lake club? Because fining residents for using a lake we don't own sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen." Margaret's face reddened, but she had no answer. Her allies, like Walter, shrank in their seats, avoiding eye contact. The residents in attendance, many excluded from the lake club's elite events, started murmuring. "Where's the club money going?" one shouted. "Who authorized these fines?" Margaret's empire was imploding, and I wasn't even there. I stayed home, sipping coffee with Ellen, letting the community's anger do the work. Ellen, who'd been skeptical on my planned scale, was now all in. "She's getting what she deserves," she said, shaking her head. "But Tom, what's next? You own the lake, then what?" I smiled. "We fix this place. Make the lake what it was meant to be, for everyone." A week later, Laura attended the next HOA meeting, open to all residents. The community hall was packed, the air thick with tension. Laura didn't reveal my identity yet, presenting herself as Clearwater Holdings counsel. She laid out the facts, the deed, the survey, and a timeline of the HOA's trespasses since I'd taken title. She then dropped a bombshell, calmly asking about the lake club's financials. "We've noted its lack of formal registration or transparent accounting," she said. "If the trespass issue isn't resolved, we may need to investigate further." The implication was clear. Margaret's club might be hiding something dirty. The crowd erupted. Residents who'd paid club dues demanded answers. "What did my $500 a year buy?" one yelled. "Fancy pontoon parties for Margaret's friends." Others turned on the board, furious about the fines, like mine, based on fake rules. Margaret tried to defend herself, claiming the club funded lake beautification, but her voice was shrill, her arguments hollow. The board members sat mute, hoping to disappear. It was a public humiliation, and Margaret's grip on power was slipping fast. Behind the scenes, Laura began negotiations with the HOA's attorney, Leonard. He knew they were cornered. Suing Clearwater Holdings would be costly and likely futile. The deed was ironclad. The HOA's insurance wouldn't cover damages from such blatant overreach, especially if the lake club's finances were shady. Margaret's personal liability was a ticking bomb, given her role in pushing the fake rules. Laura presented my demands. Stop all unauthorized lake activities, dissolve the lake club with a full audit, issue a public apology for the HOA's missteps, and pay Clearwater Holdings for the trespass. The $1.8 million figure was a starting point, meant to grab their attention. My real goal wasn't to bankrupt the HOA, that would hurt the community, but to force reform and fund a better future for the lake. Leonard pushed back, but his position was weak. The board was fracturing, with members like Fred openly questioning Margaret's leadership. Residents were organizing, demanding transparency. Margaret's dream of fighting back in court was fading as the legal and financial realities sank in. While negotiations churned, I kept documenting the lake's use. The Lake Club tried one last members-only event, a kayak race the following weekend, but turnout was sparse, and I was there camera clicking. The mood was grim. Participants glanced nervously at the shore, as if expecting another process server. The club's mystique was gone, replaced by suspicion. I also heard from Mrs. Porter that Margaret was barely leaving her house, dodging neighbors' glares. Her husband, a quiet man who'd enabled her reign, was reportedly urging her to settle and move on. Laura and I met to plan the grand reveal. I'd stay anonymous until the settlement was finalized, then announce my ownership at a community meeting. I wasn't just fighting Margaret. I wanted to rebuild Serenity Springs around the lake, making it a shared asset again. Laura suggested forming a community trust to manage the lake, funded by the settlement and modest resident fees. "It's a legacy, Tom," she said. "You're not just winning a battle, you're reshaping this place." I nodded, feeling the weight of it. This was bigger than revenge now. As October turned to November, the HOA's resistance weakened. Leonard proposed a lower settlement, admitting the board couldn't afford a long fight. Laura countered, keeping the pressure on. Margaret's personal invoice was the sticking point. She was desperate to avoid paying, but Laura held firm. "She led the charge," Laura said. "She pays, or we dig into the club's books." The threat of an audit, with its potential to expose financial misconduct, was my ace in the hole. By mid-November, the outline of a deal emerged. The HOA would pay a substantial sum, less than $1.8 million, but enough to hurt and dissolve the lake club. Margaret and key board members would cover personal fines, scaled down but still painful. A public apology was non-negotiable. I was close to victory, but I wanted the community to see the truth. The reveal was coming, and it would be unforgettable. The air in Serenity Springs was thick with anticipation as November rolled in. Margaret Hensley's iron grip on the community was slipping, and I, Tom Whitaker, held the deed to the lake that had been her throne. Owning Serenity Springs Lake wasn't just a legal victory. It was a chance to right a wrong and rebuild trust in our neighborhood. But first, I needed to close the deal with the HOA and reveal my role as the mastermind behind Clearwater Holdings LLC. The stage was set for a showdown that would leave no one indifferent. Negotiations with the HOA's attorney, Leonard Price, were tense but productive. Laura Bennett, my attorney, played hardball, leveraging the HOA's weak position. Their claim to the lake was baseless. Their insurance wouldn't cover damages from such blatant overreach, and the Serenity Springs Lake Club's murky finances were a ticking bomb. Leonard knew litigation would bankrupt the HOA and expose board members to personal ruin. My demands were clear: cease all unauthorized lake activities, dissolve the lake club with a full audit, issue a public apology, and pay Clearwater Holdings for the trespass. The $1.8 million demand was a strategic shock tactic. I didn't want to cripple the HOA. That would hurt residents like me. But I needed a figure that screamed accountability. Laura negotiated a settlement of $750,000, still a hefty sum that would sting through a special assessment on homeowners. The lake club would be disbanded, its finances audited by an independent firm. Margaret and key board members faced personal fines. Margaret's was reduced to $75,000. Walter Gibbs paid $30,000, and others ranged from $15,000 to $25,000. The public apology was the final nail, a humiliating admission of the board's failure. Margaret fought the personal fine tooth and nail, but Laura's threat to subpoena the Lake Club's bank records shut her down. If those accounts hid misuse of funds, say, from Margaret's lavish pontoon parties, she'd face worse than a fine. Leonard urged her to settle, warning the lawsuit would drag her name through the mud. By early November, the deal was signed, with the HOA scrambling to explain the assessment to furious residents. The apology was set to be read at a community meeting, and that's where I dropped my bombshell. The meeting was scheduled for a chilly Saturday evening at the community hall. Word of the settlement had spread, thanks to Mrs. Gladys Porter's gossip network, and the hall was packed with over 200 residents, some angry, some curious, all eager for answers. Margaret and the board sat at the front, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Margaret's usual polish was gone. Her makeup couldn't hide the strain in her eyes. Walter Gibbs fidgeted, his rose garden a distant memory. Fred Larson, the CPA, seemed resigned, as if he'd already checked out. Laura opened the meeting, representing Clearwater Holdings. She recapped the facts. The lake belonged to Clearwater, the HOA's actions were unauthorized, and the settlement ensured accountability. She read the HOA's apology, drafted by Leonard, but approved by me. The Serenity Springs HOA acknowledges it misrepresented its authority over the lake, imposed illegitimate rules, and issued unwarranted fines. We regret the distress caused and commit to transparent governance moving forward. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others glaring at Margaret. Then Laura paused, her voice steady but electric. The principal of Clearwater Holdings, LLC, who is one of her neighbors, would like to speak. The room went silent. Heads swiveled, eyes scanning. I stood from my seat near the back, buttoning my jacket, and walked to the podium. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ellen, sitting in the front row, gave me a proud nod. Margaret's jaw dropped, her face a mix of shock and betrayal. Walter nearly choked. Fred just stared, as if seeing a ghost. Good evening. I began, my voice calm but firm. I'm Tom Whitaker, and I own Serenity Springs Lake. The room erupted, whispers, exclamations, even a few claps. I raised a hand for quiet. 2 years ago, my wife Ellen and I moved here for peace. But when Margaret Hensley and the HOA fined me $5,000 for using my pontoon boat, citing a fake lake club, I knew something was wrong. I dug into the lake's ownership and found it belonged to a forgotten trust, not the HOA. So I bought it. The crowd leaned in, hanging on every word. Margaret shrank in her seat, her eyes darting for an exit. I continued. This wasn't just about a fine. It was about principle, about a board abusing power, inventing rules, and dividing our community. The Lake Club excluded most of you while possibly misusing funds. That ends now. I outlined my plan. A Serenity Springs Community Trust funded by the settlement and modest resident fees to manage the lake transparently. Clearwater Holdings would retain ownership, but lease the lake to the trust at a nominal rate. I'd serve as a trustee, alongside new faces untainted by the old regime, to ensure fair access for all. The reaction was electric. Some residents cheered. Others fired questions. How much will the fees be? What about the audit? I answered honestly. Fees would be $100 per household annually, far less than the Lake Club's dues, and the audit was already underway. A few grumbled about the HOA's assessment, but most turned their anger toward Margaret. One woman shouted, "You fined my son for fishing. Where's our refund?" Another demanded, "What happened to the club's money?" Margaret tried to respond, mumbling about beautification, but booze drowned her out. It was chaos. It was beautiful. I ended with a call to action. This lake belongs to all of us in spirit. Let's rebuild Serenity Springs together. Fairly, openly, no more cliques or fines. The applause was deafening. As I stepped down, residents swarmed me, some shaking my hand, others venting about Margaret's reign. Ellen hugged me, whispering, "You did it, Tom. 26.com. Margaret slipped out early, her face a mask of defeat. Most of the board followed, resigning within days. Fred stayed, vowing to help reform the HOA. The aftermath was swift. The audit revealed the Lake Club's books were a mess. $80,000 in dues spent on social events, mostly benefiting Margaret's inner circle. It wasn't criminal, but it was damning. Margaret and her husband sold their house and moved to Florida within 6 months, unable to face the community's scorn. The new HOA board, led by a no-nonsense retiree named Susan Klein, rescinded my $5,000 fine, donating it to the community trust as a symbolic gesture. Susan's team drafted transparent bylaws, ensuring no future board could pull Margaret. The Serenity Springs Community Trust took shape, with me, Susan, and 3 other residents as trustees. The settlement funds, bolstered by Margaret's $75,000, kickstarted ecological projects, fish stocking, shoreline restoration, and public access upgrades. Community cleanup days became a hit, with kids and grandparents pitching in. The lake transformed from a divisive status symbol to a unifying heart of the neighborhood. With Margaret Hensley's Rain and Ashes and Serenity Springs Lake firmly in my hands, I, Tom Whitaker, stood at the edge of a new chapter. Owning the lake wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. At 62, I turned a $5,000 fine into a $750,000 settlement, toppled a tyrant, and set out to make our Ohio community a place where fairness, not power, defined us. The Serenity Springs Community Trust was my legacy, but the road to rebuilding trust in our neighborhood was just as crucial as the battle I'd won. The weeks after the grand reveal were a whirlwind. The community hall meeting, where I'd announced my ownership of the lake, left Serenity Springs buzzing. Residents who'd felt silenced by Margaret's Lake Club now spoke up, sharing stories of exclusion, petty fines, and suspicions about the club's finances. The independent audit, funded by the HOA settlement, confirmed what many feared. The club's $80,000 in dues had bankrolled Margaret's socialite fantasies. Pontoon parties, catered member-only barbecues, even a custom banner for her boat, the Majesty. No laws were broken, but the optics were brutal. Margaret's reputation was toast. Her departure was the talk of the neighborhood. By spring, she and her husband had sold their lakefront McMansion at a loss and fled to Florida, chased by whispers and cold stares. Neighbors who'd once kissed up to her now swapped stories of her overreach, like the time she'd fine a retiree $500 for docking a kayak improperly. Ellen, my wife, summed it up over breakfast one morning. Margaret thought she was untouchable. You showed her nobody is. I chuckled, sipping my coffee. It wasn't just me. She built her own trap. I just sprang it. The new HOA board, led by Susan Klein, a retired school principal with a spine of steel, moved fast to clean house. Susan's team rescinded every fine tied to the Lake Club's fake rules, including my $5,000, which they donated to the Serenity Springs Community Trust as a public mea culpa. They also published the HOA's financials online, a first for Serenity Springs, and held open forums to rewrite the bylaws. No more urgent updates without a community vote. Susan became a local hero, proof that good leadership could heal even the deepest wounds. The community trust was my pride and joy. As a trustee, alongside Susan and 3 other residents, a biologist, a small business owner, and a longtime retiree named Clara Hayes, I worked to make the lake a true shared asset. The $750,000 settlement, plus Margaret's $75,000 personal fine, gave us a strong start. We set an annual household fee of $100, affordable for most and a fraction of the Lake Club's $500 dues. The funds supported real, ecological projects, restocking perch and bass, planting native grasses to prevent erosion, and upgrading public access points with benches and docks. Community cleanup days drew dozens, from kids tossing sticks to grandparents wielding rakes. It was the kind of unity I'd envisioned when I first bought the lake. Not everyone was thrilled, of course. A few residents, mostly Margaret's old allies, grumbled about the HOA's special assessment to cover the settlement. At a trust meeting, one man, a former Lake Club member, stood up and snapped. "Why should we pay for Margaret's mess? You stir this up, Tom." I kept my cool. The assessment pays for the lake's future, not its past. And if I hadn't acted, Margaret would still be fining us for breathing near the water. Clara Hayes, the retiree trustee, chimed in. "You enjoyed those exclusive parties, didn't you? Maybe ask Margaret where your dues went." The room laughed, and he sat down, red-faced. It was a tense moment, but it showed the community was ready to move forward, not dwell on old loyalties. The lake itself became a symbol of renewal. Ellen and I took our pontoon, the drifter, out regularly, often with our grandkids, who love casting lines for fish. Neighbors who'd avoided the lake under Margaret's rules now kayaked, swam, or picnicked along the shore. We hosted a summer festival, open to all, no members-only nonsense, with food trucks, live music, and a kids' fishing derby. Over 300 residents showed up, the biggest community event in years. Susan gave a speech, crediting the trust for uniting us. When she thanked me publicly, the crowd's applause caught me off guard. Ellen squeezed my hand, whispering, "You're blushing, Tom." I was, and I didn't care. The trust also tackled long-term challenges. Our biologist trustee, Dr. Emily Chun, launched a water quality study, addressing runoff from nearby lawns, a problem Margaret's club had ignored. We partnered with a local school for environmental education, letting kids monitor fish populations. These efforts weren't flashy, but they mattered. The lake wasn't just prettier, it was healthier, a point of pride for everyone. Even skeptics started coming around, with one ex-critic admitting at a cleanup day, "I thought this trust was a money grab, but you're actually doing something." I nodded. That's the point. It's our lake, not one person's kingdom. Reflecting on the journey, I realized how close Serenity Springs had come to staying under Margaret's thumb. Her $5,000 fine was meant to bully me into submission, but it woke a sleeping giant. My real estate background gave me the tools: deed research, trust acquisition, legal strategy, but it was principle that drove me. Margaret's abuse of power wasn't just personal. It was a betrayal of every resident who trusted the HOA. Buying the lake cost me plenty, but it was worth every cent to see justice done and a community reborn. Sometimes, I'd stand on my dock at dusk, watching the lake shimmer under the setting sun. It was mine in title, but ours in spirit. The drifter bobbed gently, a reminder of the fight that started it all. Ellen would join me, her arm around mine, and we'd laugh about Margaret's gaudy pontoon or the look on her face when Laura served those notices. "You're a troublemaker, Tom Whitaker," she'd tease. "Only when it counts," I'd reply. The Serenity Springs Community Trust is thriving now, with clear rules and a board that listens. The HOA, under Susan's leadership, is a model of transparency. The lake, once a battleground, is a gathering place. Kids splashing, neighbors chatting, pontoons gliding under open skies. It's what I fought for. Not just victory, but a future where no one like Margaret can divide us again. As I write this, I'm struck by how one person's greed can ripple through a community, but also how one person's stand can pull it back together. Margaret's tyranny was a small injustice compared to the world's bigger battles, but it mattered here. It reminded me that power, unchecked, festers, whether in an HOA or beyond. And sometimes, fighting back isn't just right, it's necessary. I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Have you faced a bully like Margaret in your own life? Someone who wielded power unfairly? What did you do? Do you think standing up like I did is always worth the cost? Or are there times when walking away is wiser? Share your stories and take a stand. Let's talk about justice, power, and what it takes to make things right.